Hello, and welcome to Day by Day True Crime Stories, the podcast where we explore a different crime or justice milestone from this day in history. I'm your host, Kona Gallagher, and today is November 1st. On this day in 1955 in Colorado, the sky over Longmont was clear and dark. There were a few scattered stars and a hint of chill in the autumn air. Then, just after 7 p.m., people on nearby farms looked up to see two bright lights in the night sky. One grew larger, then vanished in a flash that lit the clouds from below. What those people didn't realize at the time was that they had just witnessed United Airlines Flight 629, a Douglas DC-6B bound for Portland, explode 11 minutes after takeoff from Denver. All 44 people aboard were gone. The blast was so powerful that pieces of the aircraft rained down across 6 square miles of sugar beet fields. It would take hours to understand the scale of what had happened and weeks to realize that this wasn't an accident at all. Today, we're talking about the bombing of United Airlines Flight 629. Let's get started. United Flight 629 was a regular evening service, part of a cross-country run from New York to Seattle, with stops in Chicago, Denver, and Portland. On November 1st, 1955, the flight arrived at Denver's Stapleton Airport a few minutes behind schedule, just after 6 p.m., and took on fuel and a new crew for the westbound leg. Captain Lee Hall and his 4 crewmates, First Officer Donald White, Flight Engineer Samuel Arthur, and flight attendants Peggy Petticord and Jacqueline Hines performed their checks, spoke to dispatch, and prepared for departure. Weather reports were good for that time of year. Overcast skies, about 10 miles of visibility, and light winds. Just another ordinary night in the cockpit. At 6:52 p.m., Flight 629 took off from runway 8R, climbing toward 21,000 feet. 4 minutes later, Captain Hall made a brief, routine transmission. United 629 passing the Denver Omni. It was the last anyone ever heard from them. At 7:03 p.m., air traffic controllers spotted what looked like 2 white lights falling through the sky, followed by a fireball. Seconds later, phone calls began flooding local switchboards from the countryside north of Denver. People had seen an explosion. Some said that it looked like a comet hitting the ground. Others said that the sky itself seemed to open. Search crews worked through the night. By morning, the full scale of the disaster was evident. Wreckage was scattered across 6 square miles of open farmland near Longmont, Colorado. Investigators found 2 major craters about 150 feet apart, each containing burned fragments of engines and wings. The tail section had landed nearly a third of a mile away and was largely intact. The forward fuselage lay hundreds of feet in another direction. Smaller fragments, bits of luggage, clothing, and mail were found as far as 9 miles from the main site. The fuel-soaked ground continued to burn for days. The Civil Aeronautics Board, which oversaw crash investigations before the NTSB existed, began the painstaking work of cataloging debris. Every identifiable piece was tagged, logged, and transported to a Denver warehouse, where investigators literally rebuilt the airplane from fragments on a secluded grid. The FBI Disaster Squad joined them, helping identify victims through fingerprints and personal items, and assisting with forensic reconstruction. A temporary morgue was established in Greeley, Colorado, where families waited for word that rarely came quickly. When all of the pieces were finally laid out, they told a story. The tail had separated first and was blown apart from the inside. The damage radiated outward from one section, the number 4 baggage compartment near the rear of the aircraft. Tests revealed residue consistent with dynamite. Flight 629 had been destroyed by a bomb hidden in checked luggage. In the 1950s, commercial aviation disasters were still mostly mechanical or weather-related. Sabotage was almost unthinkable. But investigators quickly realized that this was no accident. The violence of the explosion, the pattern of wreckage, and the residue left behind all pointed to a single conclusion. A time bomb had detonated inside the rear cargo hold minutes after takeoff. According to later FBI reconstructions and news reports, the device contained about 25 sticks of dynamite and had been wired to a timer and a 6-volt battery. It had been packed in a piece of luggage and loaded onto Flight 629 in Denver. Now investigators needed to know, whose bag was it? When agents began matching passenger belongings to bodies, they noticed something strange. One passenger, Mrs. Daisy Eldora King, had several personal effects that had been found near her body: her handbag, her traveler's checks, and her jewelry. But her checked luggage was almost entirely obliterated. That pointed directly to her suitcase being the likely source of the explosion. King had boarded the flight to Denver to visit her daughter in Alaska. Traveling with her was her son, Jack Gilbert Graham. At least he was, until he handed her a wrapped present and waved goodbye at the airport. FBI agents soon discovered that Graham had recently taken out several life insurance policies on his mother, naming himself as the beneficiary. In one policy alone, he stood to gain $37,500, which was about $500,000 in today's money. However, she had never signed any of these policies, making them ultimately worthless. When they searched Graham's home, they found copies of those insurance papers hidden in a cedar chest, and in his work clothes, they found a piece of yellow insulated copper wire, the same kind used in electric blasting caps. Neighbors told agents that Graham had recently been trying to find a toolkit as a gift for his mother, the same term that he used when his wife asked about the wrapped package that he brought home the day before the flight. When confronted with this mounting evidence, Graham confessed. He told investigators that he had built the bomb himself, using dynamite, electric caps, a timer, and a 6-volt battery, placing it inside his mother's suitcase before she left for the airport. He had done it for the insurance money. Because there were no federal laws at the time that specifically made aircraft bombing a crime, prosecutors charged Jack Graham in Colorado State Court with the premeditated murder of his mother. His trial began in 1956 and moved quickly. Jurors heard how Graham had a history of insurance fraud and bitter family disputes. Plus, there was all of the physical evidence linking him to the bomb and his confession. It took just over an hour for the jury to return a verdict: guilty of first-degree murder. Graham was sentenced to death and executed in Colorado's gas chamber on January 11, 1957. He was 24 years old. 43 other passengers, ranging in age from 13 months to 81 years old, died in his attempt to kill one person for money. The tragedy of Flight 629 became a turning point in aviation safety and forensics. It led to tighter baggage screening policies, better collaboration between the FBI and the CAB, and the eventual creation of federal laws against aircraft sabotage. 44 people boarded Flight 629 that night. Families, business travelers, a mother on her way to visit relatives. 11 minutes later, they were gone. Investigators worked through freezing nights and endless fields to bring answers to families who could barely comprehend what had happened. Their work helped shape the way air disasters are investigated today. It's a story of loss, but also of learning, of how tragedy forced progress. Thank you for joining me on today's episode of Day by Day True Crime Stories. If you found today's story compelling, please be sure to join me again tomorrow as we explore another significant event in true crime history. Until then, stay safe and remember that behind every headline is a life worth remembering. Day by Day True Crime Stories is a Little Monster production.
Hey, you can do it.